Hey, welcome to Woodworking with Wes. Today I have a very fun project. I'm going to show you how to build a chessboard that is really going to challenge your woodworking skills. Let's get started. This project will challenge your precision, creativity, and attention to detail. And I will be showing you how working with contrasting woods, intricate patterns, and exact measurements. Whether you're a seasoned woodworker or looking to push your boundaries, this chessboard will be a masterpiece you can be proud of and an heirloom you can treasure for years to come. I start my chessboard with a sheet of 1/2" MDF, and I'll show you the reason for that. Now this is bigger than the chessboard is actually going to be, and you'll see the purpose for that in just a moment. I'm going to create a grid pattern in my 1/2" MDF with my stacked dado head. The one thing I had to do first though was to make sure that my piece of 1/2" MDF was perfectly square. That's very important. Your measurements and your precision on this chessboard are going to be extra crucial. So let's make sure that we do that. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is, and this is perfectly square, same measurement on both ways, I'm going to cut a center line down the middle cross on my piece of 1/2" MDF. Now, I have my dado set where I think my center is, but I'm going to show you how to test to make sure you get your center. Make a tiny cut, flip it over, and make a corresponding tiny cut. Okay, now I have only just measured. This is where I'm going to come back and test. And I'm not perfect. I'm just a little bit off. So I'm going to just bump it just a little bit, and I'm going to turn my piece of 1/2" MDF, and I'm going to do the same process and I can do it all the way around until I get absolutely perfect. And believe it or not, I got perfect on my second try. Now I've marked a little X on here. This will be my face side. So let's go ahead and cut the first cut. There we have the beginning of our grid. What I'm going to do now is my spacing. Like I said, my spacing is 1/4 inch dado, 2 1/4 inch squares. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to mark 2 1/4 inch right there. According to my measurement, I need to be 10 5/8 from my fence out to the beginning of my dado. 10 5/8. So let's set it at 10 5/8. All right, right there. And I'm going to make just a little sample cut. And like I say, this is much bigger, and this allows me to test my measurement every time. I can test my measurement every last time. And I'm wrong. I'm wrong. What I did is I calculated 2 inch and not 2 1/4 inch. So I messed up. Okay, let's go 2 1/4 inch. And I know what I did wrong. My 10 5/8 needed to be on the far side of my blade, not on the inside of my blade to the fence. So my 10 5/8 measurement was correct, but I measured to the wrong side of my dado stack. Okay, remember here is the dado that I cut was wrong. I reset my dado set, and now I've made the cut and it's correct. So let me show you how we make this next cut. Now we want a line here, 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 here. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to turn on my dust collector. Okay, you can begin to see the grid pattern showing up. And we'll do the same thing every time. We'll make sure that our measurement is 2 1/4 with our stacked dado set, and then we'll make a cut each way. I'll go ahead and finish up my grid, and then come back and take a look. As you can see, I have completed the grid on my piece of 1/2 inch MDF. I just wanted to point out a chessboard is 8 sections wide. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This outside will be trimmed off. But I used that to make sure that my measurements were all correct as I made my grid. So I had some scrap out here to be able to make sure that my measurements were correct before I made my final cuts with my dado set. That's why I made the board extra big. The next thing I'm going to do now is, while I still have my stacked dado set up, I've cut me a piece of mahogany that is a little extra long. I'm going to make corresponding dado cuts along with our grid mark, corresponding dado cuts in my piece of mahogany. I'm going to make them half the way through so that I can cut this piece of mahogany into 1/4 inch strips, turn them around, and do a half lap grid. So what I'm going to do now is create a grid out of my mahogany that will fit down into my dado and stand up and create a raised grid of mahogany. So I'll make a couple of cuts and show you how that looks. In order to make the dado cuts in my mahogany piece that I will create my half lap grid with, I started off by making one cut in the center of my board. Then I went ahead and I made a little piece for this is my finger joint jig. So basically what I did is I created another setting on my finger joint jig, and I just can move my piece of mahogany out to the end like this and make an additional cut. And you can see how by doing that I have lined my dados in my mahogany piece up with the dados on my grid. We'll go ahead and finish doing that out. We'll do it the rest of the way out. You'll see my board is a little bit longer than the actual pieces that are going to be the chess piece, so that when we put our half lap together, it will extend out and we can cut this all at once, creating our perfect chessboard grid with the mahogany pieces installed. I'll go ahead and get this finished up, and I'll get these cut into strips. Once I get this piece done, I will cut it into strips that are the width of my dado cuts in my grid. And then by taking it and reversing it, we'll create the half lap joints that will create our raised grid. Let me go ahead and get that far. I'll come back and I'll show you how that all fits together. But let me show you, just let me demonstrate our little jig here that we made for our half lap joint. We have a little pin there. Our pin fits, boy, it's tight, but that's good. There we go. Now it fits down there really good and tight. Oh, pulled my little pin out. But anyway, there's our grid pieces cut on our piece of mahogany. Okay, let's finish that up. After I had made the dado cuts in my piece of mahogany, I cut it into strips that were the width of the grid dados that I made in my board. We're going to be putting these together in a half lap configuration. Now a half lap, if you remember a half lap, is when you dado the pieces like this and you put it together like that, and it creates a half lap joint because you're halfway through on each of your pieces and you turn them and face one another, and then that makes your half lap joint. We're going to go ahead and put all of these pieces together in this configuration with half lap joints. We'll start at the center, and what I'll do, and I'm just going to dry fit this so you can see what we're going to do, because this gets very time consuming because you have to glue each one of these little trenches and put all the pieces in. And so what we would do is we would line up all of the pieces that face up and then line all of the pieces that face down to tie the grid together. And you can see how this would now begin to create the grid that I was talking about, the raised grid. So we had a dadoed grid. Now we're going to put our mahogany pieces in there and create a raised grid. Now I'll go ahead and get this all done. We'll come back when I get this all done and show you how it looks. These marks that I have put on my piece of MDF indicate some future work that I'm going to be doing, but mostly what I was wanting to do was find the center. Our chessboard is only this big. Remember, this strip out here is extra for just cutting, but so I wanted to be able to find my center, and that was why I marked these pieces here so that I could start with the center and work my way out with the grid. All right, I'll go ahead and get the grid put in, and then we'll come back, take a look. We have our mahogany grid all glued in. Now, just reminding you that I took glue and I put in each one of the dados of the grid that I did, and then I glued in my mahogany grid. Now, as I put the pieces in, I glued them in, and then I took a block and I pounded them down like that so that they were good and flush. And so I have a nice flush level of this raised grid. I'm now going to be cutting to the size of our board, but before I do, some of the glue kind of got a little messy, and so what I've done is I've taken my chisel, and I've just taken my chisel and gone around the inside of every opening and cleaned up anything that I might have had in there. And it just was very easy. I had only just a couple of places where, now there's one right there. And I just take my chisel, and you can see a little glue there that got outside my dado. And it's just very easy to clean off. There's another one. Because this has got to be very clean and very flat, because that is going to be the area where we put in our squares. And so we've got to have our squares nice and flat against our MDF. Okay, just like that. I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of that cleaned up. Then we'll go over to the table saw and we'll cut our size. We'll now cut this border piece off that was the piece that I made that was too big. We know exactly where to cut it because we're going to be cutting it right along the edge of my dado that I put in here, taking off this outside piece and this outside piece. Then we'll turn it around and reset the saw and cut off this outside piece and this outside piece, giving us the exact size of our chessboard. So first off, we'll take our measurement, 22 and 15/16. I'm going to check that both ways to make sure that I'm correct. And we are 22 and 15/16. So let's set our saw, 22 and 15/16. And then we'll bring our piece up and we'll just check it and make sure that it lines right up. And wow, it does. How about that? Okay. I have set my saw blade, the height, to cut through not only my 1/2-inch MDF, but also my mahogany strips, so it'll cut it all at once, giving me a nice clean cut along the edge. Okay, now we'll reset our saw and cut the other two edges, bringing it down to the final size of our chessboard. The next step that I need to make is to put a border all the way around my chessboard because I need to close in these boxes that are on the outside edge. I have these all closed in, but I need to close those in too before I go any further. And our border is how we do that. I've made these border pieces that have just some multicolored wood in it. They will be glued on flush with a 45-degree corner all the way around the chessboard itself. So let me go ahead and get those all put on, and then we'll come back and we'll start putting in our squares. And you'll see that is the really cool part of this chessboard. With the chessboard cut to size, the next thing we had to do was to put on the border that went around it. And I have that all on and glued on. I also went through and if you'll notice, I marked my squares X's and O's. X's are going to be for the dark color, O's are going to be for the light color of wood that is going to go in our grid to create our chessboard. Let's take off our clamps and look at the border that we put on. And then I'm going to show you how I put it on. Okay, I clamped the corners to make sure they were good and tight. I've glued them on the edges and I've glued them in the corners to make sure that I had nice tight corners. But I'm going to turn this over. You can see that my walnut goes all the way to the bottom. But my maple and mahogany were only the thickness of the piece that I'm going to put in here and the 1/2-inch. So it's actually a 1-inch thick. And I added a piece of 1/2-inch MDF to the bottom side of my border pieces in order to attach it to my chessboard. So there's no nails on the sides and I have a nice clean border. We're going to go ahead and sand this all nice and smooth once we get our pieces put in. That's the next step. I want to show you the maple and walnut that we're going to be using for our squares. Now you'll notice that it is cut on a 45-degree. Let me show you what we're going to do. We're going to take and we're going to cut. I'm going to set this at just a little more than 2 1/4 inches because we're going to clean up our cuts. And I'm going to cut all of my pieces like that. Well, okay, let me just go through and show you, because it's almost too hard to explain what I'm doing, but I can certainly show you. So let's make some cuts and I'll just show you. After I cut my pieces into 45-degree strips like this, and I'm going to take my saw sled and I'm going to cut my 45-degree strips into squares. Let's just show you what I'm going to do here. This is just a scrap piece, but I'm going to show you, even though my square is a square that is going to fit into our grid, the grain is a 45. And so when it goes in to our piece like this, now like I say, this is just a scrap piece, so it's not cut the right size, but you can see that our grain is going to go at an angle. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my grain come in to the center of my board. So all of my maple and walnut pieces will be angled toward the center of my chessboard. Let me go ahead and get a few put in so that you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, we're putting in our squares now. Remember, our circle is our light color, our X is our dark color. Then this is how I'm installing, and you can see the grain points in to the center. Let's go ahead and let's put some more pieces. Okay, this is going to be a light colored one, and what I do is I put a big gob of glue in the bottom. Okay, my grain has got to run this way, so I put it in there and it fits really tight. And we pound it down like that. And it doesn't make any difference if I mar that a little bit with the hammer, because I'm going to be sanding this whole surface off nice and flush. Okay, here is our dark piece. Again, a big gob of glue. Anything on this side of the line runs this way, so will this dark piece here. I made these to fit very tight. Okay, there we go. All right, and then this is a light piece, and it's on this side of the line, so it'll face this way. This is more than enough glue to hold, because it's going to be held not only by the grid, but also by the glue on the bottom of it. Okay, that's how we're going to install all of the squares facing in to the center, light and dark, just like a chessboard. Let me go ahead and get the rest of the chessboard put together. Let's come back and take a look when it's all done. I now have all of the squares. Now remember, I used these little squares, and I just wanted to show you they're 2 1/4 by 2 1/4 by 1/2 inch thick, and then the MDF 1/2 inch underneath makes the full thickness of our top 1 inch. And then of course, like I said, we put the border around it. I'm now going to go back. I'm going to take my palm sander and I'm going to sand this all down flush. Now my grid that I made out of mahogany stands up a little bit, and I made that specifically to stand up a little bit so that I could sand this all down nice and flush when I got all done. And that's the next step, and there's quite a bit of sanding to do. Just to give you an idea, it took me about 2 hours to glue in each one of these little pieces, to cut them to fit. They were all cut the same size, but in order to cut them and then put them in, to glue them in, it took me about 2 hours to put all of the top together. So it's a very time-consuming project as far as installing, but because of the way the grain goes, you have to do each individual piece in the mahogany grid in order to give it that centered look with the grain. It's really going to look cool when we get it sanded out and get a finish on it. It'll be really cool. Let's come back after I get it sanded and take a look. With everything all put together, I sanded it down to all the same level. 180 grit, 120, and now 150. It's all nice and smooth. And you can see the grain, how it comes together in the center. We're going to go ahead and put some Natura hard wax oil on it for our finish. Let's go ahead and do that, and that'll really make the colors pop. Let's take a look. Okay, we have mixed our Natura oil 3 parts to 1. It's a 2-part mix. 3 parts of oil, 1 part of hardener. And it says to rub your oil in with a white Scotch-Brite. A white Scotch-Brite is not very aggressive in its scouring ability, but it kind of drives that oil into the grain, and that's why you use it. I'm going to provide a link to this Natura oil. You buy it on Amazon. That's where I got mine, and it's really been an oil that I've enjoyed using as far as a finish goes. And it's very simple to use. You just mix it, you put it on your piece, you let it sit 3 minutes, and then you wipe it off. But look how it brings out those colors. Oh, I just love that part. Okay, we'll let that sit now for 3 minutes according to the directions. Now the wood that we have used, this is black walnut, hard maple, African mahogany, and then we've reused the same woods, maple, hard maple, African mahogany for our grid work, and walnut for our dark squares. The walnut on the side, I found a really dark piece in my batch of wood, so I used it for my border so that it would really stand out. The walnut that is for the squares is not quite as dark, but that's just fine. It is the contrast that we're looking for. We'll give that just 3 minutes, then we'll come back and wipe it off. Okay, we've let our 3 minutes go by. Let's polish up. I'm just using paper towels to wipe it down. A soft cotton cloth works really well, but so does a paper towel. Okay, I'm going to tip it up on edge here so that I can get the edges really good. Okay, and then it says wipe off until it's dry. And there we go. Well, what do you think? I love the way those squares face toward the center and give it a very unique chessboard look. I've never seen one like this. I thought about this for a long time, and I thought, what can I do to make a chessboard that would be very unique? Well, here it is. Well, we ended up with a beautiful chessboard. Sometimes it's fun to just do things that are kind of unusual. This is the kind of thing that I really enjoy doing, and I hope you did too. And we're going to see you next time when I do something fun again on Woodworking with Wes.